Anna Hoffman, and welcome to this episode of Data Exposed Live. We are super excited to have you joining us today from wherever you're streaming from, whether it's Learn TV, Twitter, or Twitch, or YouTube, or somewhere else we're not aware of. Oh, or if you're streaming in from the Microsoft Reactor, we thank you for joining us today. Today is a special episode because we are actually doing an Ask the Experts session. So today I have on two very special guests. I think you all might be familiar with them, but we're going to be talking about Azure Arc, Azure SQL Managed Instance, and our goal is really to help disambiguate or demystify all the different options and other questions you might have really related to anything. We treat this kind of like an AMA, so you can ask whatever questions you like. Now, as we get started, the first thing I want to do is bring up our wonderful speakers. So first, I'm going to bring up Buck Woody. Buck, thanks so much for joining us.
Hello, Anna. How are you?
I am good. How are you?
Every day is just amazing.
Good. I'm glad to hear that.
Yes.
Can you tell our viewers, for those folks that might not know you, can you tell our viewers a little bit about what you do and kind of what your focus is?
Sure. I'm Buck Woody, and I'm a data scientist here at Microsoft. I work on the SQL, the Azure Data Team, we call it nowadays, because it's much broader than just SQL Server on premises, although it still includes all that. And I work on some of the adoption efforts, developing courses, doing sessions like these, teaching. I also run the community, the Azure Data Community, and a quick plug for that, aka.ms/data community, all one word. If you go there, you can join in some of the close to 100 user groups around the world, in countries around the world, 90,000+ people around the world in this. Definitely come and learn those. I also run the MVP program for our group, and have some great folks working in that. And then, of course, from time to time, I'm super privileged and honored to be on Data Exposed.
Yeah, definitely. We have a series we do together called Something Old, Something New. So if folks watching haven't seen that before, definitely something, without any bias at all, I would recommend people check
I
out.
highly recommend it. aka.ms/SOSN, Something Old, Something New.
Awesome. All right, cool. Thanks so much, Buck. So we also have with us someone you might also know, and that is Bob Ward. Bob, thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, Anna, thanks for having me here today. Really excited to be on Data Exposed again. Super excited to be on a show where #AskBW means Ask Bob Ward. It's a very great way to advertise the show. Oh, Buck!
Or Buck Woody, or BW, the other. Yeah.
Wait, Anna did not tell me that you were going to be on here too.
Surprise!
Yeah, I mean, it's BW squared. It's Buck Woody, and then, Bob Ward.
Whoops. Oh, well. So, yeah. Hey, thanks, Anna, for telling me Buck was going to be in here too. I guess we'll both have to talk together today. Great.
Oh, it's like the Parent Trap. You have to trick people.
It's a Parent Trap. Exactly. Excited to be here today.
Yeah, we're excited to have you. And Bob, just for viewers who aren't familiar with some of the stuff that you've worked on in the past, can you share with us?
Sure. This is kind of crazy to say this, Anna, but this is my 28th year at the company, all working on something called SQL Server. So somebody did ask me recently, somebody is not a technology person, and said, what do you do at Microsoft? And I said, well, if it's a Microsoft product or cloud service and has the word SQL on it, I pretty much work on that. Whether it's internally working with our team to talk about customer feedback or new releases of what we're doing in this space, or being with people like yourselves in front of the camera, right? Or in an event talking about SQL. And so anything SQL edge to cloud, I kind of work on that kind of thing.
Awesome. Great. And thanks so much again, both of you. I think we're going to have a really great show. I do want to put that out there as just a reminder to folks tuning in that this is an Ask the Expert. So we're expecting lots of questions. We're hoping for questions from you all. So please keep your questions coming in, questions or comments, even sports related comments we're taking today.
Right. Yep.
So it looks like Anders Peterson says, yes, Bob, I am wearing my Packers shirt because he knows, I guess you're a big Packers fan or something, Bob.
Yeah, that's unfortunate for Anders to do that. I'm sorry that he feels the need to wear a jersey of a lower team, a team lower than the Cowboys.
Well, to me, I mean, I don't really know a lot about sports ball, but Bob's been educating me. And if I understand it correctly, Well, your picture's right there behind you. You're a big fan of the Buffalo team. Buffalo, what are they called?
Yeah, Buck, that would once again be an incorrect comment by yourself. That is a Buffalo, because I am actually broadcasting from the great state of Colorado today. So Buffalo being the theme, of course, in Colorado. But no, I am not a fan of the Buffalo Bills.
Oh, okay.
It'd be the Dallas Cowboys.
Cowboys. Okay, got it. Cowboys. Got it.
All right. So we will take sports question, but you'll see me kind of try to rein us back into Azure SQL and Azure R topics, and kind of to get us started, like just to get people's questions, kind of brains kind of melting, so they have some questions. Bob, I thought it would be great, like if you could start by telling us like what actually is Azure SQL, and then maybe drilling in on a managed instance.
Yeah, thanks, Anna. Let me know if you can see this okay right here. I've got a slide to kind of go over some of the aspects of managed instance. Can you see that okay?
Yep.
Perfect. I think the right thing to do to make sure we understand what managed instance is to show, we've been doing this for a while, Anna and I have also been doing this for a while, is to make sure you understand how Azure SQL Managed Instance fits into the portfolio of Azure SQL itself. Azure SQL is not a specific service, it's a suite of services. Whether it be running a SQL server itself in a virtual machine, we call that also infrastructure as a service, or running a complete SQL instance in the cloud, we call that Azure SQL Managed Instance, or just having a database in the cloud, which is called Azure SQL Database. If you look in the middle here, Azure SQL Managed Instance is really, quite frankly, the combination of running a full SQL Server instance with managed capabilities. I want you to think in terms of what it looks like from a management studio perspective. When you connect Management Studio into a managed instance, it looks just like SQL Server. But there's going to be a couple of things that you don't see, for example, in Object Explorer. Like you don't see always-on availability groups. And that's because we build one for you automatically should you pick the right service tier option, so you don't even need to manage that aspect. So think of the fully managed service from Microsoft behind the scenes, platform as a service, as a SQL instance. And in fact, if you look at their best for modernizing existing apps, we kind of feel like you can migrate your SQL Server today into a virtual machine with SQL Server. That's kind of the quickest way to get into the cloud. You can also migrate into managed instance, but we call it modernization because you're taking advantage of new things in the cloud that are going to make things easier for you to run your application. Now, I kind of put this together, Anna, a little bit because people have asked me, okay, that sounds interesting, but from a feature perspective or from a user experience perspective, is it SQL Server? So think about this. It's a pre-installed SQL with an abstraction away from the operating system and all the infrastructure. So again, we just pre-install SQL for you. It is the same engine as SQL Server, say SQL 19, but it's ahead of the game a little bit, ahead of SQL 19, because it's versionless. Imagine a world where you don't patch anything anymore. We take care of all that for you. And the T-SQL language, that language you know and love, is almost 100% compatible. And the minor differences that exist, I've got a little shortcut for you to go take a look at that. So I think of it this way. A fully managed service is SQL plus the cloud to help automate some things. Now, there are other features that you might find interesting that are instance level features. Because again, this is a complete instance for you, whether it be agent, resource governor, link servers, machine learning services, all of those things that you know that are outside the scope of a database, but part of your instance, you get access to that with Azure SQL Managed Instance. And you may have seen things like BI services, SSRS, AS, and IS that you use. You get those with your SQL Server licenses. Those are not part of Managed Instance, but they integrate well with those services, whether you run them on premises or in the cloud. So that's kind of a way of looking at like the whole feature set of SQL Server. But Anna, I kind of picked on one area that I think is very interesting of how we automate things or make them managed, and that is availability. So a built-in complete availability system, whether you pick a general purpose option or business critical option, think of it like a failover cluster instance for general purpose or a complete availability group system for business critical. And we back it up with money. We back it up with a service level agreement to make sure you have this 4 nines capability to keep you available all the time. And then we have this amazing redundancy story. System databases, by the way, which a lot of people don't see that today with availability groups, that are included in our replicas. You can set up auto failover groups across regions. Think of that like a distributed availability group set up for you. And then this is really great. Your application, complete connection abstraction built in. You don't install a listener or any of those kind of type concepts. Then from a disaster recovery perspective, how about a complete built-in database backup system for you, automated completely, and even keeping your backups up to 10 years, completely redundant, whether it be geo-redundant, zone redundant, or local redundant. But you do have some backup control because it is a managed instance. So you can make your own copy-only backups, and you can restore backups from any SQL Server or other managed instances into this environment. And then you can recover easily, a very simple point-in-time restore system, or even recover deleted databases that got accidentally dropped, or doing restores from geo regions. Like if you had backup set up for geo redundancy, you had a problem in a given region, you could actually go restore things from those regions. So Anna, a complete SQL Server, but managed for you with instance level capabilities, all running in the cloud. This one slide alone tells you what the value proposition alone could be for an Azure SQL managed instance.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think there's a lot there, and I think a lot is comforting, especially for our SQL Server people when they see that is it SQL Server, and they see a lot of the capabilities that they're familiar with coming to be a thing in managed instance. Bob, I'm gonna pause because like we have so many questions coming in right now.
Yay, let's do it.
So let's start going through some questions. I brought Buck back up in case Buck, you have some answers to these questions. So all right, let's just get right into it. The first question comes from Karthik on YouTube, and Karthik says, "Hi all, can we expect SQL managed instance business critical tier specifically with more storage?"
Yeah, Karthik, thanks for joining us today. Thanks for asking that question. You know, we just announced 16 terabyte support for general purpose managed instances, and we fully intend to increase storage capacities also in business critical. Not ready to announce a specific time that we're doing that, but I promise you that is one of our intentions, to increase that storage capacity for a business critical service tier in the future.
Awesome. Thanks. Thanks for that, Bob. And thanks for your question, Karthik. This next question comes from Meatball Ceros. They say, what happens when the 4 nines are violated? So I think this was about availability. You said at least 99%, 99.99% of availability.
Right. Thank you, Meatball, for asking the question. What a great handle. Yeah, honestly, it's called a service level agreement because it's a contract. When you sign up for a subscription and then you deploy managed instance, you now are part of our service level agreement. And if we violate what we've told you as those 4.9 capabilities, you get credits back to your Azure subscription from a billing perspective. You can imagine that we have a very high incentive to not make sure we violate those SLAs. But yeah, it's a complete system setup. So if you think that's something that's happened for you, you can contact Microsoft support and apply for service credits.
Awesome. Thanks. And thanks, Meatball. Actually, Meatball clarified that his name is George. So
okay, thanks, George.
All right, let's move on to more questions. So this question came in from Twitter from Gary. I think this would be a good one for you, Buck. Let me just grab the question. I pulled it. It is, here it is. How can you get Java applications to connect to a managed instance using an Azure Active Directory account?
Okay, good stuff. Java connected to managed instance. So something you want to think about, first of all, is that you need to be using the Microsoft JDBC driver for SQL Server. That's the number one thing, because you can't just connect to it with just about anything, because you're going to lose some of the Active Directory integration that you have there. So that's number one. Make sure you have the latest one, by the way. Version, I think it's 7.2 has the latest. And you're going to have like various authentication mechanisms or connection mechanisms that you can signal within the driver connection string. Things like Active Directory MSI, and that'll let you do Azure SQL databases, Synapse Analytics from an Azure resource with identity support enabled, which is really nice. You can also do the MSI client ID within that. You can do it for the older version, with version 6. You can do the Active Directory integrated, and you just put authentication equals Active Directory integrated, and then you can connect to Azure SQL database or Synapse Analytics using integrated authentication. And to use that, though, you need to make sure you federate your on-premise on-premises Active Directory, ADFS, Active Directory Federation Services, with Active Directory in the cloud. And that way you can get that back. Once that's set up, you can connect that way. Now, something else you need to think about when you're using that library. So that's the connection mechanism. I think we may even have a short link that we can put up for you that has the pointer to exactly what to do, and even the download location for the driver. But something else you need to think about is when you program against it, there are some considerations between Java and a database. Java has different data types than SQL Server. Well, so does R or Python or anything else. So we do have a document as well, another short link maybe, that has up there what kind of data type mapping. You want to be very careful there, especially for dates. You don't want things to flip around or do something unusual. The other thing that you want to figure out is how you manage the result sets, whether you're going to persist them down or how you're going to handle transactions. Also, table valued parameters become interesting in Java. So we've got some information on that. And then always recommended, and I want to make sure I always cover this. We have always encrypted support for Java. You definitely want to read up on enforcing that. Security should not be an afterthought. It should be something you do in specific. So I think we've put those links up there for you that hopefully that will help out. Java and any database, always interesting to connect to.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Buck. And I think it's cool, too, that we do have these programming guides depending on what language you're using. Like, we're not just saying, like, you have to develop with .NET or, you can't use SQL. And what's also nice is all these drivers are kind of the same, whether you're using Azure SQL Database, Azure SQL Managed Instance, SQL Server, or Azure Arc, which we'll get to soon. I think this kind of relates, though, to another question we got in from the forums. And that question was, I'm using Managed Instance, attempting to create a linked server against Synapse On Demand, but not getting a connection. Bob, is this something you think you can help with?
Yeah, thanks, Anna. It is calling out the fact that you can do linked servers with Managed Instance because it's an instance level capability. And we do support the ability to actually connect that to a Synapse system. So there's a lot of reasons probably why somebody can't get the connection to make that work. So I know that one thing that I found very handy, one of our colleagues, Jovan Popic, has a very nice blog where he details out exactly the steps you need to do if you have a managed instance and you'd like to make that connection to a Synapse system, to Azure Synapse Analytics. And the reason why that's important is that you don't have to move data. You'd like to be able to query data in Synapse and see that, maybe even together with a SQL Server managed instance. So there's two ways to do it. One is through external tables, actually, through Managed Instance, and the other is a linked server. Jovan has some very nice detailed steps of everything you should do. I recommend you first go to that blog and make sure you followed all those steps as they described and see if that doesn't resolve your issue.
Awesome. Great. Thanks, Bob, and hope that helps. Okay, moving along some of our questions. This next question comes in from NSS Dharma. Any options for monitoring a PaaS instance freely?
Monitoring like a managed instance freely. So first of all, if you have tools, you can even consider the fact that inside managed instance, there are capabilities in the SQL engine like dynamic management views, query store, things of that nature that just comes with your managed instance. So you yourself could use your own tools to go query that information and look at it. So from a monitoring perspective, there are things that just come with the engine, and Managed Instance supports those that you can choose yourself.
Yeah.
One thing to consider, though, that is not necessarily free is a really nice technology called SQL Insights. And I think you've had Elaine maybe on your show here to talk about that. Think of that, I think of this way, as a perfmon in the cloud. A perfmon in the cloud that allows me to monitor Azure databases, Azure virtual machines with SQL Server, and managed instances, and even see this information together. So if you're looking for maybe a lower cost solution, maybe consider SQL Insights. That's in preview today. But if you really said, look, I just don't want to, I have a managed instance, I need to do something that doesn't cost me any money. Remember all the built-in things that just come with it that you yourself have access to.
And Management Studio, all the reports work as normal. Right. You've still got your activity monitor. So all of the surface areas you had for monitoring before, none of that changes. And if you want a sort of an enterprise-free monitoring solution, a lot of companies these days are going to Grafana and Kibana. In fact, we use some of that ourselves for certain things. But as Bob pointed out, trust me, I used to write these systems all the time. I've written so many multiple management and checking logs and all those things from disparate systems. You're not going to get close to what you can do in Insights. And sometimes it's worth the cost of admission just to get that done. And this is not an expensive product. Insights is not like some really heavyweight expensive product. So if you want free, you have everything, as Bob pointed out, that you've always had. You're also able to connect up to anything that can read a DMV that you're using today. But if you want an enterprise space thing, definitely take a look at Insights. It's really going to be hard to beat. Grafana Kibana is a roll your own. You'll have to build it, but it is free.
Awesome. Thanks both. Yeah, there was a follow-up question on SQL Insights. Karthik asked, does SQL Insights have any alerting mechanisms specifically for SQL agent job failures on managed instance?
Yeah, SQL Insights is more about monitoring like performance and telemetry type data, to be honest with you. There are some specific metrics across everything that comes with the managed instance. So some of it could be like availability or something of that nature, but I'm not aware of a specific counter that Insights has to look at agent job failures. I'd have to double check in there.
Yeah.
So no, you have to use a different mechanism that you normally would use today with SQL Server to see, did my agent job fail? That could be database mail, for example.
I was getting ready to say, that is built right in. And in your job step, you have exception reporting and you also have success reporting. I do both. Whenever I do a job, I do not just say, if you fail, let me know. That's a terrible idea because what if that system isn't working? It'll never let you know when you think everything's okay. While it's a pain to get an email every morning that the server's not out of space and everything ran and my DBCC checks ran, all those sorts of things, it's a pain to get those. I know when I don't get those, I need to, if you treat it like Bob, you've got kids, if your kid gets really quiet, that's bad, right? You go find, I had a little t-shirt on my daughter and it said, if this t-shirt gets quiet, come find me. And so that's the way I do it with database alerting. So I use the ones that are built right in for agent failures. Although you can still monitor that with other tools, I tend to rely on something really close to the metal.
I know we've talked to the team that runs Insights. We've had a chat in the future there. Could we add in more about failure detection or errors and things of that nature, not just performance telemetry data? So that's something that the team is considering. But today, as Buck just talked about, like database mail, the things that just come with agent alone, those are the best mechanisms to monitor failures.
Yeah, Anders says server with thousands of jobs, failure alerts over one email 7 to report all jobs. That can be hard. But there's ways to do that. There are ways, Anders, to do that. I think you're saying that you do have ways to do that. I don't know if you guys have even looked at Windows desktop automation free tool for the Windows operating system, and I use that to go through and just do regex type stuff against logs and things. Works out really well.
Nice.
Awesome. Great. I love all the questions. So keep the questions coming in. There's another question that I saw from AK. And they say, for a new development, I believe for the cost and flexibility of Azure SQL, database is the best. Am I correct? And MI is good for migration purposes. So I think this is more like a what to use when between DB and MI.
Yeah, that's a great question, AK. And thanks for asking that, because even though we internally think we've tried to get that message out, it's great to keep reinforcing it. So don't get me wrong. It's always possible to do new development for a managed instance. There's just no question. But it is fair to say that we at Microsoft feel like we're targeting more new cloud-born apps to use Azure SQL Database, because you're correct in one aspect. There is more flexibility for things in Azure Database. For example, serverless. You have the ability to have a serverless database. We can even pause compute if you're actually not using it. Or hyperscale, where you can do really huge read scale and get massive sizes because you're just focusing on the database itself. So for new cloud-born app development, there's no question. We tell customers we think one of the best options is Azure SQL Database. But don't get it, let's be clear about managed instance. It is a complete SQL Server instance. But guess what? You know why we built managed instance? The name of the project was called Cloud Lifter, because at that time, a few years back, our customers told us, hey, I have agent jobs or replication or things that are instance level capabilities, or even some T-SQL things that Azure Database doesn't have. So I want to migrate my SQL server to the cloud, but I can't do that to Azure Database because of the limitations, hence born the idea of Cloud Lifter. But keep in mind one thing, as we said earlier, you're correct. It's a great way to do migration. We even support things like online restore migrations, almost zero downtime to do that. But it is a modernization play as well. So it's not just you moving a SQL server there. It's actually getting better, faster, more efficient, and more cost effective when you go that route.
Awesome, thanks. And hopefully that helps, AK. George, I see you have a lot of questions. I'm not sure all of them are going to be great for this outlet, but let me just show them to Bob and Buck, and then you guys can kind of decide how you want to move forward with them. So one of the questions George asked is about how to do TDD in complex environments.
Yeah.
Another question, did you want to take that one?
Yeah, I can take that one. Test-driven development is difficult in mixed environments and hybrid. I wonder if it would be useful if I gave you an article that talks all about it. There you go, Anna. I don't know if you could paste that. It's huge.
Yep, we'll share that in Twitch. So
the bigger the Uber here, we have a series of resources for you called the Cloud Adoption Framework. This is you can just go out and Bing that and find the headwaters to it. But we go over every programming paradigm, every data distribution paradigm, anything you can find in an ITIL catalog, anything like that, and we cover it and how you do it in the cloud. So there's a whole article on this, and you are going to cover the test-driven development cycle. The big deal here is the definition of the word done. That's always true in a TDD environment, but in the cloud, you have to define done early. But there's some examples in there of the code where you can do test-driven development in a complex environment like the cloud.
Awesome.
I don't know whether this makes sense to also discuss with TDD, but I think DevOps, Azure is the place to do DevOps, right? So to me, I kind of relate DevOps a little bit with this question some as well. And we have some really great content. Anna, you brought people on the show before that talks about how Azure SQL Database can be a great target for things like DevOps environments.
It's funny you mentioned that because I think that's related to the other question that George had, which is how do I convince my superiors that XPO or ADO is overkill for a database that is on the order of thousands of items?
I wish we could help with fixing our customers' environments. I go into some, and you have to make sure you don't shake your head while they're talking. It is hard. All you can do is present the logic and talk the terms that they understand. So often they have a hammer and it's like, we were told to do this, so we're going to use this to do everything, whether it's a tool or a procedure. So what I do with those kind of things, I try to explain the rationale of why one-offs are going to happen, that you're going to have some things that are not like others, and you're going to have to do this in cost and benefit analysis. That's what they understand. It costs this much, but you get that much. Companies usually deal in deltas. They don't mind spending $1 million if they make $2 million. But if you just come in and say, we need to spend $1 million, they're not talking to you. You need to talk about, we're going to make $1 million today with this cool solution, right? So whenever you do that, just do a cost benefit analysis for them. If you're not familiar with how to do them, just go out to your favorite search engine named Bing and just type in perform a cost benefit analysis for a technical solution, and you'll come back with some great simple examples.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Buck. Just for those of you that are just joining us, I saw we just had a big spike in people join. So welcome. Thanks for joining us. By the way, we are doing an Ask the Experts right now. So from wherever you're streaming in, go ahead and put your questions in, and we are answering them as they come in. I want to take one more question, and then I want to kind of shift gears towards talking towards Azure Arc. But this last question, I want to make sure we clarify because it's important. Karthik says, I heard that SQL MI general purpose is not for production workloads, and the support SLA is different from SQL MI business critical. Can you please clarify?
Yeah, Karthik, I'm glad you asked that, because we want to make sure we make it crystal clear about why we'd use these different options for managed instance versus the other. So the comment about not for production workloads is definitely not true. I want you to think of managed instance general purpose as a failover cluster instance just built for you, right? Using like shared storage. So it has more capacity because of that. For example, we in preview today for 16 terabytes of storage for that option. Business critical is a scenario where we're building replicas, non-shared storage, right? Local storage. So the failover time is going to be faster in those environments. It turns out the SLAs are the same for both of these right now. So business critical offers replicas. It's going to be a little bit faster failover because of the fact that we're always doing replicas. Plus, you get one free read replica. So if you need an environment with a little faster performance, you're going to have less space though. You need that faster performance for, say, latency sensitive applications, but you also need like a read replica that just comes with business critical built in. Plus a feature like in-memory OTP only comes with business critical. Think of it like from an addition point of view. But we have plenty of customers that are using managed instance today with general purpose in production, and it serves their needs just fine.
Awesome, thanks. And thanks, Karthik, for that question. All right, so we're gonna transition a little bit. John Askew is ready for it. We are going to talk about Azure Arc because we've been hearing a lot about it, and sometimes we've noticed there's some confusion. So, Bob, I would love if you could tell us, like what is Azure Arc? And there's a few different options. So, how do we think about like an Azure Arc SQL Server versus an Azure Arc managed instance?
Yeah, thank you, Anna. So, we just made an announcement at the Hybrid Digital event here a few weeks ago about Azure Arc, and it comes in a lot of different flavors. So I don't have a specific slide about Azure Arc for SQL Server, but think of it this way. Think about an existing SQL Server, you being able to attach to Azure and take advantage of things like Azure Defender in your environment. But Anna, what has happened is managed instance is a great technology running in Azure public clouds and government clouds, but some customers told us, I love the concept of the managed part of the instance, but I need to run it in my environment. I need that feel of Azure and a managed service, but it cannot be run in the Azure public cloud or government cloud. I need more control of that infrastructure. Thus was born the idea of Azure Arc Data Services. We announced the general availability of Azure Arc enabled managed instance just recently. Today it's technically in preview because the bits itself, the actual launch of the bits available to you will be at the end of this month. So it's pretty quick here coming, right? We also announced a preview of Azure Arc enabled Postgres in this environment. So think about these concepts. Always current's one of the biggest ones. Remember we talked about a managed instance being versionless? Well, how about a versionless in your environment? How about the ability to deploy a managed instance very easily? How about like deploy from the portal, a managed instance just like you do in Azure, but that deployment will be pushed down into your environment. But that same feel of deploying quickly and picking scale would be there as well. And then because of the fact that we're connected to Azure, you get a unified management experience to see all your different SQL assets, because this is now part of kind of the Azure family, again, though, running in your environment. And we want to make sure that you understand that the same security that's tried and true for you in SQL for managed instance will exist in your environment as well in this Azure Arc scenario. And then here's the kicker, cloud billing. How about for the first time ever paying for a SQL based on cloud billing running in your environment? You're connected to Azure, so we can then track your usage and we can bill you for your Azure subscription, again, for a managed instance running in your environment. Now, I'm going to defer talking about the any hardware, any Kubernetes for a second, because I'm going to let Buck talk more about that, but we're going to use the power of Kubernetes to make this vision possible. I kind of found that this slide might be interesting for you, Anna. It kind of helps decide, it's a little bit of what to use when. Remember, you see here the managed instance, the Azure SQL database, even Elastic Pools, the Azure infrastructure. You want a full instance, just a database. And notice it says here, in Azure, Microsoft managing that behind the scenes. But what if you wanted it to not be in Azure? So Ford's a good example of a company that's done that. They came to us and said, we love the managed instance story. We need to be able to run, though, the managed instance in our environment. We said, you know what? If you can bring up a Kubernetes distribution that you like, could be many different flavors, we think we can make that actually happen. So it's any infrastructure now that you manage. We can, again, I'll give you that feel of managed instance with those capabilities I talked about. You get the full SQL Server engine, but you get automated HADR, for example. running on Kubernetes, powered by Kubernetes, running in your environment. So I like to think this way. One of my colleagues, Dinakar, told me, he said, we're trying to bring you managed instance, but not in Azure, but give you that feel of Azure. It's like mirroring what SQL managed instance looks like today. And that is the promise, what Azure Arc we're trying to bring to customers today.
Gotcha. Wow, this is pretty cool. And I think, like a lot of people are going to be interested in this, especially if you can't run in Azure, like you mentioned. We did get a few questions, but I was just wondering, like, is it possible to do a double click on this architecture? Because I'm still like trying to figure out like what that means.
Yeah.
As far as like it's Azure SQL managed instance, but it's also a full SQL Server instance.
But it's not in Azure, but it's from Azure.
Right.
Yeah.
Azure, I like that, Buck.
Why don't I take a stab at that? I'll tell you what. I've got a little architecture diagram here that we can show if you like, and it's not comprehensive, and it's not got every little piece because it would take all day. But let's talk about this. So I see a couple questions are like, wait a minute, your environment. Bob just whizzed by. Oh, you can put it in your environment. What is your environment? Well, I'll tell you what. It's in Kubernetes, and Kubernetes, as we've been pointed out by George, who speaks a little Greek, I think, from time to time, means governor or pilot, which is, he's absolutely correct. And in fact, the people that named it pilot then don't like saying the whole word Kubernetes, so they call it K8s or K8s because there's 8 letters after it. So they named it something that they immediately shortened. Well, anyway, Kubernetes is an interesting environment such that you can declare in a manifest, just a text file, hey, I'd like some groupings of things running and make sure they're always running and run them in a little environment. And I'm just going to tell you what to do and you do it. Very similar. In SQL, we say select star from table, and we don't tell it where on the hard drive or how much memory or any of that. It just goes and figures all that out. We declare what we want in SQL. It's a declarative programming language, and it goes and does the work. And this is the same. You're going to say, I'd like an environment. Go do that. And it will stand up storage, and it will stand up things called pods, which contain containers, 1 or more containers. And the containers can do just about anything, but it'll keep them all together. And you're thinking, wow, this sounds interesting. And does it scale or whatever? Well, a little company, I think it was Google. You may have heard of them. I've heard of them from time to time. They're running their enterprise on Kubernetes, right? So you deploy Kubernetes. You do that wherever you want. If it's standard Kubernetes or even OpenShift, we'll run it. Yes, we will run Azure SQL in Amazon or Google or on premises or wherever it runs. It's completely up to you. And this is mind-blowing. So let me take a look at how this works. So what we do first is you deploy Kubernetes somewhere. You figure that out. There's an API that Kubernetes uses that allows you to talk to it. And the standard tool that's used there is something called kubectl, kubectl.exe, or if you're in Linux, just kubectl. And this is a command line interface that lets you talk to Kubernetes. Well, we also have Azure Data Studio, or even if you're deploying inside Azure Kubernetes Service, which is Kubernetes running in Azure, you can use the Azure CLI to talk to that same API. So once those tools are stood up and you've just got regular old everyday Kubernetes running somewhere, the first thing we'll do is we'll do an AZ command that talks through the kubectl CLI, the interface, the Kubernetes API. It will run out to the Microsoft Container Registry, pull down some containers, set up some pods, and create a deployment. And the first one of these things we have is something called the controller. This is a service that's going to know about everything else. It sort of does all the work to talk to everything else. Now, what I'm showing you right now is something called direct connected mode. And I'll explain the other version in a bit. But after it gets itself up and running and it knows where it is and it's running on Kubernetes, yes, that could be in Amazon if you want, or anywhere else. Then it starts bringing down other containers and pods and services, things like monitoring and logs, HADR, scaling, backups, things like that. Brings all those down. And this is awesome. And so this works great and everything's running and you're saying, okay, great, I can do this in Kubernetes today. Where's the Azure part? Well, we also bring down something into another area called Azure Arc integration. Now, this is the magic sauce here. In the direct connected mode, what will happen is this. I've sort of built this out and I'll explain this complexity in just a moment here. Coming down to the Azure Arc integration are any deployments you want or any actions you'd like to take. Also, that amazing advanced data security. If you haven't played in this, I'm a security guy from way back, have my CISSP and all that. All that comes down. You get all your GDPR reporting, all of your enforcement, everything you need comes down to that Arc integrated area. And what goes back up to Azure is your inventory of all the resources, any billing that you have going back and forth. The logs and metrics from the system are going up there into Insights, so you can look at those things and so on. And then any backup retention work that you're working with. You can now work with that with the portal, with the Azure command line interface, with Azure Data Studio, or with AZ-CLI commands, and see all of this running. Let me see, what have I forgotten? Oh, that's right, Bob's favorite thing, databases. So now what you can do once you have this all running, wherever, if you're a bank and you have to be on premises, but you want those reports from security and you want to bill in one place and you want the logging viewable anywhere and so on, you say, I want that thing that Bob's been talking about, this managed instance, and I want it with the HA, just give me that. And you just put that right in the file, down it comes. It deploys from the controller and the Azure Arc integration. Now everybody's talking. And as Bob pointed out in preview today, what we have is also Postgres Hyperscale. This is the distributed version of PostgreSQL if you're using that, and allows you full integration that way and carries along through this system. Here's the amazing thing. Bob mentioned DevOps recently. And all of these things can be put, because it's a manifest, because it's a file, you can snapshot your environment and version it. So you could version your environment as you go forward with DevOps, allowing everything to maintain. Now, keep in mind, you get this evergreen SQL MI. So this whole thing of, oh, we waited 10 years to upgrade, and now we have a 3-year migration project. I was talking to somebody the other day, they just finished a 7-year migration project. I don't even want to think about that. I can't do anything that feels good for 7 years. That's just stunning to me. That just goes away. That problem just kind of goes away. So with this, again, this sort of a larger architecture, there's also obviously some fine-grained pieces to this, but this is just mind-blowing. I mean, the way we can do this now. So you're getting Azure wherever you need it. All the Azure goodness wherever you need it, and the MI goodness that Bob's been talking about. And if you need it, PostgreSQL as well.
Awesome. Wow. That is pretty cool. I mean, I think there's a lot of questions that are coming in. I just wanted to ask one more question before we get to some of those questions. Like, this is a lot. Like, is it hard to get started? Is it easy to get started? How can people start playing with this?
Yeah, great question, Anna. And in fact, what do they say? A good question is the question I know the answer to, and a great question is on the next slide. So we have something called the Azure Arc Jumpstart, and we have it in GitHub, so it's freely available. We give you a 0 to hero ability to start with nothing and go up to the deployment types, and we walk you right through this. There's also some various scenarios, kind of a supermarket, we call it, so that you can pull these things down and say, oh, I want to look at one that looks like this. And so you can pull those down. That's just there at HTTPS azurearcjumpstart.io. If you go to that, you'll get a beautiful interface, walks you step by step through deploying this. So you can definitely get started there. All the documentation, all kinds of things. And look for more training and other documentation coming as we get closer to sort of the release date that we talked about.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Buck. That was really helpful. We do have some questions that come in, but I also wanted to comment that we had some comments about you, all pretty funny. So I'm going to share them with our viewers. One said,
oh my goodness,
I could see Buck having some music related SQL database on Azure Arc. I think they're referring to instruments in the back. We're just waiting for the theme song for Azure Arc.
Yes, I meant to talk to you about that. I want to change up your theme song. I was working with GarageBand today, and I have some great ideas. It involves like a lot of dubstep. I'm seeing you as a dubstep type person.
Yeah. Yep, that's definitely me. And then another person, I actually laughed at this one. They said, "Oh, Buck, that guy who worked for Contoso."
Well, yeah, I left Microsoft for a while and went to Contoso to work in their medical division. It didn't work out. I think it was a special hire, just to meet some kind of thing they had, and they sent me back.
Nice.
Yeah, so for those of you who aren't getting the Contoso reference, but came on Data Exposed a few weeks ago to talk about Azure Arc. So that's another good plug. So if you want to learn more about Azure Arc, you should subscribe to our YouTube channel, and you can actually go that link. Yeah, there it is. Thank you. So if you go to that page, you can actually go watch this episode of Data Exposed live, where Buck is an employee at Contoso, a fictional company, and he walks through all these use cases for Azure Arc with someone called DJ Data. So it's a great episode. I would definitely check it out if you want to learn more about Azure Arc. But that being said, let's take a look at some of the other questions that have come in.
One there is on Ledger. I can talk to that a little bit if you'd like for me to talk about. Yeah, the Ledger feature that we're announcing for Azure SQL DB allows you to have a off-chain blockchain experience inside a database. So what do we mean by that? So you have Ethereum and the other blockchains that you can use, and these are incredibly useful for banking, but they're also useful for a myriad of things, especially quality control and manufacturing, medical manufacturing. All these kinds of things can use a blockchain, but you may not want to be part of a public one because it's just out there and it can be slow and brittle and so on. So we created something called SQL Ledger, and we now have inside the database the ability for you to make your own private blockchain experience for any of your data that you're doing there. What this does is gives you ultimate all actions audited, immutable all actions audited. So no one can change anything without someone tracking that. It's a really great feature. And we do see people that are going to start using this for fiat currencies even to make their own transactions available.
Awesome. Yeah, and we're seeing a lot of excitement around Ledger, and we have some Data Exposed episodes and some Data Exposed live episodes as part of our security series. So you're going to want to check those out. This next question comes in from Oren, who says, how can users connect Azure Managed SQL? So I'm not sure if this is Azure Arc or Azure SQL Managed Instance, so maybe we can address both. But while having external IP addresses changing as they are working from home.
Yeah, I'll address that, Anna. So there's a couple of ways to connect into a managed instance. One of those that we recommend is through an Azure Virtual Network. So then you would take your environment and try to make sure that your connectivity, whatever that external IP address looks like, is just part of a virtual network that ties into Azure itself. That's the most secure method. There is a public endpoint, though. There's a public endpoint that you could use to connect to a managed instance with a specific port. There's something called a network security group where you can set up a set of rules to decide what IP addresses or range of IP addresses could be allowed to get into that public endpoint. But again, we kind of recommend using the virtual network approach, which is the most secure way. So there are ways to do that no matter what kind of IP address you're using to ensure that you're part of a virtual network that peers or connects into the virtual network of Azure Managed Instance. It was one of the big reasons, another thing that customers wanted from us, because at the time, Azure SQL Database did not have private link. So this is a more secure way to do managed instance connectivity. And so that's our recommendation. And Anna, we have great discussions and documentation on this, but hey, I think you've done a Data Exposed live episode with a Rohit on a network connectivity into things like Azure Database and Managed Instance that somebody could watch and understand how that works.
Yeah, and it looks like Oren has clarified his question and says, I was talking about managed SQL, not managed instance. So I'm thinking, Oren, can you correct us? Like, are you talking about Azure SQL Database specifically? Because you also mentioned it has no VNet native connectivity. Just not really sure what you mean by managed SQL that
But,
could be.
but here's the thing, Oren. I really do recommend go back and Anna, you can go in your YouTube series. So Rohit Nayak, one of our colleagues, is kind of our connectivity guru in our team.
Yep.
And I don't know how many episodes you did with Rohit, Anna, but he goes through exhaustive diagrams and so forth about how to connect anywhere from where you are into Azure SQL Database or Managed Instance. So I think all your answers were found there.
Yeah, I think that's the episode that he's looking for if he goes and checks it out. So definitely, Oren, go check out the stuff that Anna did with Rohit.
And also, Anna, you and I did, of course, Azure SQL for Beginners and Azure SQL Fundamental. So Azure SQL for Beginners has like 60 videos, and we have specific videos where you have visualizations about all the connectivity options to go into database. So that could be a help as well.
Yeah, I think, Oren, just to wrap that, like the biggest thing you want to make sure is that whatever you're trying to connect from has access to either the virtual network where the private endpoint is deployed, if you're using private endpoint, or you have some sort of specific access set up, either using virtual network rules or firewall rules. So, but Bob and Buck both mentioned we have done deep dives in a few places. So just go to our YouTube channels and find those. And I think that will be helpful for you. Awesome. Okay, so the next question comes from AK. He says, this may be a silly question. Can quite a few things which we achieve with Azure Arc also be achieved if we open ExpressRoute or VPN site-to-site connectivity between my data center and Azure?
Yeah, I'll take a stab at this, and then Bob, you can jump into absolutely. As far as like if you think of end result. I would like to query a database from on-prem, and I want to do that without having to go through a VNet and so on. Absolutely. You open up ExpressRoute, you're connected to your VNets inside of Azure. So that's great. The thing is, there's a lot of environments where you're not allowed to do that. So while you can get managed instance, you absolutely could do that up in Azure. You could get SQLDB, Synapse, Azure ML, storage, all kinds of things. If you just connect an ExpressRoute, man, you're in good shape that way to get the same result. But we're talking about environments where you can't do that, or where you want to be able to take your environment and check it in CI/CD with a Kubernetes flavor, or you want to run it over in another cloud, or you want to run it on premises, or all of the above. You want to connect everything that way, and you want to do it declaratively. So I think you may want to separate the mechanism for what you do versus the goals of what you do. So it's less about, oh, I can do this here and this here. You can probably do that in a lot of ways. It just depends on what your requirements are and what your constraints are. We always deal with requirements and constraints, what it must do and what it's not allowed to do. Someone may say, oh, it must have that great Azure security, but the constraint is can't run in Azure. In that case, this is exactly for that. This is what Ford that Bob was talking about told us. We love all that. We want to do those things, but nope, it's got to be here. Make it work here. And so we did.
Yeah, I would just add in that, to be clear about the connectivity between Arc and Azure, the whole idea is to Arc together something you have to run on your on-premises, but still get the flavor of Azure, whether it's being able to deploy things in Azure through a portal experience or CLI and have it show up in your environment, or to send data up for billing, metrics, logs, and so forth. When I think of ExpressRoute and the other options you talked about, I think about connecting my applications into things running in Azure. So if you're running things in Arc in your environment, you probably already have a way within your own private network to connect those apps to those things.
Awesome. Thanks. Thanks both. This next question, I lost it. Oh, I got it. This next question is a little bit off topic, but we're going to take it for some light comedic relief. Washington sports ball fan here. This is Andy Leonard. Bob, will the Cowboys become cowmen?
Yeah, Andy, great question today. Really on topic. I don't know anybody would be a sports ball fan of any Washington team, so I don't even know why you would pick that. So it's a great question, except the Cowboys are already men. We're already very, very well established. And, I'm going to go on record here today that we will beat Washington this year. That's not.
I think they're going to win the World Cup. I really do.
Oh, my goodness.
I mean, they could, right? I mean, they could go all the way, right?
Go team, Buck. Is that Buck? What's the phrase you say? I hope all team people.
I just hope everybody has fun. Yeah, I hope they let everybody play and everybody has fun.
Let everybody play. That's your Let everybody play and have fun, right? Exactly. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Andy, for that nice distraction. And it's always interesting to talk about sports ball on a data show. But
sports ball, yeah, that's what we call it, sports ball. Yeah.
All that being said, let me see. We did get another question that came in earlier, and this one I think is interesting. It says, "What's the management differences for Azure Arc versus Azure SQL?"
Interesting one. So I'll take a stab. Buck, chime in, right? So
sure.
Remember what we said in the beginning. An Azure SQL managed instance with that key managed is that we are going to provide management capabilities like auto HA, auto DR, version list. Those are like three big things that stand out to me. Deployment, those kind of type things. That's about Azure SQL managed instance. We want to bring those capabilities into your environment with Arc. That's why we call it Azure Arc managed instance, right? We want to give that same feel. The differences are you own the infrastructure now. You own the Kubernetes pieces that are required to do that. So in other words, for us to do auto DR, to do auto backups, you have to provide all the storage to make that happen. Whereas, of course, in the cloud, we're doing all of that behind the scenes. So from a management perspective, SQL Server itself, all those capabilities you know and love, all it just exists there in both those environments. It really comes down to the automation for management services that we're providing that are the same. But the biggest difference is you run the environment. So the infrastructure pieces, all the automation to do that are your responsibility now.
Hey, Bob, can I let this be a great question?
Yeah.
Okay. Anna, can you show them my great question?
Look at that. So it's almost like it was teased up or something.
It was almost like it was teed up. It wasn't, by the way, just so you all know, this actually was hidden. We were going to show this and decided not to, but I real quick, like a bunny, just unhid it. So if you'll look here, you'll see sort of the management. And I think what Bob was pointing out is very important. It's the level of management you care about. As far as tools, Management Studio, Azure portals and things like that, command line things, third-party tools, those are all fine. They're going to connect in at different levels. But for instance, in SQL DB, you're not going to go worry about running out of drive space on the base operating system. We'll handle that for you. But in other things, you might, right? If you're on-prem, you might actually care about whether you've got enough room on the D drive to store your database. So you can kind of see the different levels of management comparisons that we have here that'll tell you where you take care of it and where we take care of it.
Quick question on this. I see that there are some like very light blue checkboxes, some dark blue checkboxes, some half and half. What does that mean?
Go for it, Bob.
Yeah, so look at, for example, SQL Managed Instance, Azure Arc, elastic scalability. So it's true that we're going to be able to have scale because we're running in Kubernetes, but it's not going to be the same scale as in the cloud because we run the entire infrastructure. So the half ones are more about you own some of that. We're going to try to give you those same capabilities in Azure, but you own a piece of it. Look at automatic HADR. I was just talking about this. We can make the DR happen at a SQL perspective, but outside SQL, if you don't set up all the storage right, then the DR may be meaningless. Whereas the cloud, remember we talked about geo-redundancy? Like in Azure Cloud, we automatically take our backups and spread this across Azure data centers in various regions. You would have to do that yourself to make that successful because you own the infrastructure. If you look at Azure SQL Managed Instance for those big light blue ones, data sovereignty, that's a good one because it could be that the Azure public cloud doesn't meet your sovereignty needs, actually. That's one reason why people do that. Whereas in Azure Arc, you control where this resides, so you have complete control of the sovereignty issue. This is why there's a difference between the dark blue on Arc and then the lighter blue, because in many Azure public clouds or government clouds, it may meet your sovereignty needs, but there could be some regions where we don't support you, and therefore you need to go run this. And it's another great reason why to run Arc.
Yep, absolutely. And it to put a top on that, it just depends on what you want to care about. What do you want to control? What do you want to care about? And if you're like, look, I'd really like HADR handled, then you pick the options that'll do that for you.
Awesome. Well, I think that was a great question to kind of end on. I think we answered a ton of questions. This was super useful. Buck, Bob, thanks so much for joining us today. I think we'll probably have to do this again if you're willing.
You mean the Ask BW, Ask Bob Ward show?
The Ask BW Buck Woody show?
Well, would you tell me ahead of time that he's actually going to be on here next time?
Don't tell him ahead of time.
Now you know.
Yeah. Okay.
Don't tell him ahead of time.
Yeah.
He won't show up.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, to our viewers, we want to thank you for joining us, bringing all your great questions, engaging with us. It's useful for us to see what people are asking just as much as hopefully it's useful for you to see what we're saying as answers. It's been a great show. We want to thank you so much for joining us on Data Exposed Live. We got some thank yous coming in, so thank you all for joining. And to our viewers, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. We stream every Wednesday at this time. We also release new episodes on Thursday. So with that being said, we hope to see you next time on Data Exposed.